People were being buried alive at a rate of about 2% at the end of the 1700s. Pirates could legally kidnap people. Yellow fever were killing 15% of the population.
They didn't want contact with the outside world, and I think that kind of thing can breed flowers of evil.
America's most haunted city coincides evenly with its dark past. Living through the Civil War, yellow fever outbreaks, the Great Fire of 1820, murders, suicides, the mysterious underground tunnels, and its supposed self-isolation back in the day. Here's my adventure exploring the 17 most paranormal places in one of the country's oldest cities, Savannah, Georgia. I've traveled to many supposedly haunted regions, mostly a skeptic of the whole thing, but after speaking to many locals and city tour guides, there are too many Savannah stories to turn a blind eye. The very first haunted location I went to here, Bonaventure Cemetery. With Gothic-style tombstones, it's recognized as one of the most beautiful cemeteries in the world. But also according to WSB-TV local Georgia news, it's one of the world's most haunted hotspots. It was opened in 1842, and since then there have been many paranormal activity reports. And I love how the moss is just eerishly hovering over a lot of the grave sites. The reports include women crying but no one around, apparitions of soldiers, and very creepy feelings. But over here is one of the most famous statues in the entire cemetery. This is the life-sized statue of Gracie Watson, who at the age of 6 died of pneumonia. Some say she haunts this grave, but most of the ghostly sightings of her aren't even here, but at Madison Square, which we'll be going to a little bit later on.
So Bonaventure Cemetery was a plantation. After the plantation was shut down, the family sold it off, it became a cemetery, a huge cemetery out on the water. There's this big, beautiful plantation house, and they're having this huge dinner party. The butler comes to the owner of the house at the head of the table, whispers in his ear, and the owner stands up and says, "We're gonna move the party out onto the lawn." And the guests think this is strange, but they all go. Everybody comes in, grabs the tables, the chairs, all the food, the crystal, the china, they set it up on the lawn. And when they get out on the lawn, they look and they see the roof of the house is on fire. And there's nothing they can do to put it out. They know the house is gonna burn to the ground. In this sort of a gentlemanly gesture, they just move it out onto the lawn, they watch the fire, and the house is never rebuilt, and the place becomes a plantation. And people say that that event is now haunting the cemetery, that you can hear the guests, you can see the fire. Anybody who might have died under those circumstances is haunting.
Heading into downtown, I stopped by the mysteriously beautiful Candler Oak Tree. Estimated to have been growing since the 1700s, the Candler Oak Tree is one of the oldest landmarks in the region. The average crown spread is 110 feet, and it has a 17-foot circumference. But why is it haunted? Well, there's the old Candler Hospital, which served as a POW camp for Union soldiers serving time. And apparently there have been photos of captured images of ghosts of these Union soldiers in the region.
I have friends who live in Oglethorpe House, and they've heard footsteps on the roof at night. And there was, ages ago, I believe a murder-suicide happened there. And people still talk about hearing heels clicking down the hall.
What a lovely city. Approaching the heart of downtown now, my first stop is the Hamilton Turner Inn, a very interesting history. Whoa, what a beautiful hotel. Made famous by the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Paranormal activities inside the inn include sounds of children laughing, billiard balls rolling around on the upper floors, and sightings of a strange, cigar-smoking man sitting on the roof. This is the Marshall House. USA Today named this hotel the most beautiful haunted hotel. I'm gonna try and go inside.
It has been a hotel since the 1800s, but during the Civil War, they used it as a makeshift hospital for both sides of the war. So there was like a truce at the door. People would go in, get their amputations done before anesthesia, and then go out and shoot each other again. What you gotta understand about 1864 is our cemetery had been shut down 10 years earlier because of our second yellow fever outbreak, which again killed about 15% of the population. That cemetery overflowed with bodies. Now it also got down to 17 degrees that year, which is rare for this time. So the soldiers are actually starting to sleep in some of the family crypts that are underground and taking the dead bodies out and burying them in the surrounding areas, which is why we actually find random bones throughout that area. There's no cemetery, and it's 17 degrees. It's hard to just go dig a hole. So what do they do with the body parts? They put them under the floorboards because they're afraid of them. They're afraid they're gonna spread disease, and so they like hide them in different places.
So since 1851, this hotel has been used as a hospital 3 times. Once for Union soldiers, and twice in the 19th century for the yellow fever epidemic. And the funny part, about a century later, workers were doing reconstruction on the building, and they found the arms and legs and thought it was a crime scene, until they realized that it was really just a surgical room.
So not only have they seen ghosts of the soldiers' missing body parts, they've actually found the body parts.
They've seen a soldier ghost, hypothetically, with missing his arm up to here.
Yeah.
And they saw that exact body part of just this. Oh my gosh. They don't allow interviews, but I've talked to 2 of the employees there. They gave me a pamphlet on staff stories and stories that people who stayed at the hotel that have had paranormal experiences. One of the staff members, he was on the 3rd floor, he heard a cat meow. Apparently it was a ghost cat, no cat was in sight, and other people staying there have had the same experience. Right now I'm headed to one of the more haunted places, according to locals.
The Moon River Brewing Company up on the 2nd floor. There's a super violent ghost up there that's like throwing people down the steps.
It's one of the oldest buildings here in Savannah, built in 1821, and it has a very dark history. In 1832, the city's doctor shot and killed one of the more disliked people in Savannah while drunk. Many ghost hunting channels actually made an episode on this area. Some of the reports here are of a lady wearing white at the top of the staircase. And there have also been reports of ghosts throwing bottles as well. Pretty crazy.
I have my own theories that this has nothing to do with the stone teeth theory, and this actually has to do with more like demonic possession type stuff. These ghosts, which both tend to appear as shadow ghosts that were left behind after that person died. And they can attach to you, they can physically harm you, and I stay away from them.
Savannah was very isolated for a very long time. Before mass communication, all these little cities were their own little fiefdoms, their own little principalities. Savannah was isolated and very secretive. They didn't want contact with the outside world, and so they didn't have it. And I think that kind of thing can breed unsavory things, what Baudelaire called fleurs de mal, or flowers of evil.
Formerly known as the Calhoun Square, the Taylor Square is yet another very notably haunted location here in Savannah.
This square supposedly was a potter's field where a lot of people were buried when they died without money back in the day.
There is a weird vibe here, especially in comparison to all of the other locations I've been to so far. See, in the early 2000s, they found human remains dug up underneath the square, and they say it was built over a slave burial ground. One of these buildings is home to a judge whose son was dating a bootlegger's daughter, and both fathers weren't happy about it. After a night out with the girlfriend, the man was murdered by her father, and apparently the guy was left hung and mutilated on the porch overlooking the park. As a result, there have been reports of that guy walking around this square in morning time. One of the oldest buildings in Savannah's history, the Pirate House. It was built in 1754. This used to be an old rest stop for those who traveled on sea, or some would even go as far as say, an old rest place for pirates. Granted, it does have a pretty dark history. There are tales that people, against their will, were forced down into the basement to serve on the sea. But now, it's actually one of the most well-known restaurants in the city.
You know, ever so often when I'm giving a tour through this place, something strange will happen at just the most pivotal of moments. I say, and then she saw the ghost, and then in the background you'll hear somebody has just dropped a tray of dishes, or poof, a light goes out. One day I was telling a joke to some guests, and all of a sudden when I got to the punchline, boom! The light bulb above their table completely shattered.
Shortly down the road in a residential area, rather than a building, I came across one of the most historically haunted homes in the city. Here's the haunted Lillibridge house. It's the only home to have known that had an exorcism within. It was built by a man from Rhode Island in 1796. It survived the Great Fire in 1820. But later on, when workers were restoring the home, there were footsteps and voices from the floor above. When they went upstairs, no one was upstairs until suddenly they heard those same footsteps from the floor below. And there were also reports of the neighbors at the time seeing a man in a black suit and bow tie while hearing women screaming. And the thing is, during the exorcism, it was actually an Archbishop of Georgia. He performed the exorcism for about 45 minutes and it had no effect. But shortly after that, they found a crypt at the basement of the home. But the next place I'm going to has a very dark, mysterious history. Here's yet another haunted restaurant in Savannah called 1790.
I, for my birthday this year, did something most people on their birthdays do, paranormal investigation. And I did that 1790. And we stayed in the room where my favorite ghost in town, Anna Powers, lived and died. 3 really weird things happened when we stayed there. First, we were working with a spirit box, like a ghost box with the words pop up, you know? It's just a cheap little app called Vox. Word cry comes up right at the window where she was murdered at, and she was murdered because she was crying. And she was crying because her lover was going out to sea, and that upset her, and that upset someone else, her husband. And they get in a big fight. She goes out the window. This is how she dies. This earring went missing for a long time while we were there. It's actually a normal thing that happens. Jewelry goes missing, and you can, if you ever stay at the 739, stay in room 204. That's the room where Anna Powers lived and died. And you'll find 10 years worth of journals of people sharing their experiences. And it's crazy how often like jewelry goes missing, or people will find it and stuff. Also, I go to download it, and I do live streams on TikTok under Dusty Joy Life, and I go to download that one. Error. File erase, gone. And this has never happened. I do this weekly. I download my live streams all the time, and it never happened before. It never happened after. But once there was paranormal involved, the electronic equipment failed. That happens a lot with the paranormal. I believe that it has to do with the stone tape theory. Basically states that when you have a high energy event like a murder, it can capture this recording in the materials around it, whether it's the walls, the ceilings, the trees, or the bricks. It can play back over the years. And the energy that presses play is you. You are the electricity that like presses play on that recording.
Called 1790. So the bottom floor is a restaurant and a bar, and then the top 2 floors are a hotel. And supposedly room 204 in there is haunted by this lady named Anne. You request to stay there specifically. My wife and I eloped to Savannah, so we did what we call the haunted honeymoon. And we stayed in 5 different haunted hotels in Savannah over the week we were here. We stayed in room 204 in the 1790. And the first night we stayed there, we were laying in bed and I got shoved in the back. And I kind of rolled over and I sat up real quick and I looked at my wife and she was already asleep. So I was kind of spooked out, but I just went back to sleep. You know, I put a pillow over my head and pulled the covers all the way up. But the next night, my wife and I switched spots because I told her, I was like, I can't sleep on this side of the bed. It's way too creepy. It's close to the bathroom, which is like super creepy. So she was like, whatever, you know, you're a sissy. I'll switch you. So we swapped places, and she got woken up at least twice that night to somebody like whispering in her ear. The first time they just said hey, and my wife said she kind of laid there for a second and heard like something like moving in the room behind her, but when she finally like sat up and looked, there was nobody there, obviously. The second time she didn't know what they said, but it was already like daylight out. It was like 7:30 in the morning, and she just said like, hey, something just woke me up again, let's get out of here, let's go get some brunch.
So this is the Kehoe House. Apparently the family had 10 children and 2 of them died here. Granted, it's mostly legend. Many guests say they have encountered ghost children during their overnight stay. Considering now, it's a very beautiful bed and breakfast. One of the main reasons why this place is apparently haunted is because it used to be a funeral home. There it is. So here at Johnson Square, first off, they have a statue dedicated to Nathaniel Greene, one of my favorite generals in the Revolutionary War. He was the general who basically helped win the Revolutionary War against the British in the South, in the southern colonies. However, going back to Bonaventure Cemetery, it was here where there have been many reports of the ghost of Gracie Watson. Most people say that a little girl dressed in white will soundlessly run throughout the square. Many claim it is Gracie Watson herself, and back before she died in 1889, she would often play here in this square.
My experience with I guess paranormal activity is when one of our buildings, or it's called the green room, where we change clothes every day for my job. I was in there one day by myself, and I was getting ready, and all of a sudden I heard someone trying to get in the lockbox to get into our building, which is normal that we do that. So I heard someone open the door and it slammed or shut, and I kept going about my business. Well, when I got ready to leave, I noticed nobody was in there, and nobody had come out in and out, because I asked the guy who was sitting out there if he had seen anybody come in or out. He said no, he was looking at his phone, but he sure heard the door shut. So when I left, he left with me. I think it kind of spooked him, and I've always been wondering what that was about.
Just across the street from it, another one of the most notably haunted locations in the city. This is the old pink house. James Habersham Jr. hung himself because his wife died. The story is very similar to Annie. Let's go inside. There's a little bit more to it. Apparently servers, or people who work at the restaurant, say that there's the ghostly James Habersham. They say he's a neat freak. Straighten table settings, put chairs in their proper place. And there's also been strange reports of women getting locked in the bathroom. It's about 9 o'clock at night, and I'm here at Madison Square, named after the 4th President of the United States. In the middle here is a statue of Sergeant William Jasper, a soldier in the siege of Savannah who was killed during the battle. I will say, out of all the other places I've been to today, this is one of the more eerie locations, in my opinion. The primary reason why it's haunted is because they say that there are bodies of buried British soldiers found during the construction of homes in the area. And there have been reports of a tall, dark, shadowy figure walking towards them at night. Then, when it gets close enough, it disappears. So Madison Square is right here, but just on the other side is the Sorrel House. What are some of the most haunted places here in Savannah?
Sorrel Weed Mansion.
Sorrel Weed Mansion.
Yeah.
As you can see, this home showcases beautiful Greek Revival architecture. It was built by Francis Sorrel in 1840. His wife died, and unfortunately Sorrel's second wife ended her life after catching him having an affair with an enslaved woman in their home. Afterwards, that enslaved woman passed away by a suspicious hanging, and apparently there are 12 British soldiers buried under the home.
I have not gone on the tour yet there because I'm actually sort of freaked out. People on the tours there have a feeling. See, like hauntings can be like auditory, they can be visual, they can be like feelings. You know, you ever enter a building and get that bad vibe? You know, that's from something horrible that happened there. And the Sorrel Weed House, supposedly this dude choked a lot of people to death there, and like people feel that feeling. They feel like they're being choked up in the building. And we'll actually leave the tourist guides with it.
So right across Taylor Square, previously known as Calhoun Square, is 432 Abercorn Street, one of the more haunted homes in the city. This home is connected actually to mass murders, disappearing college students, and apparently daughters that were tortured till they died. Now, most of the stories, this one has the least amount of evidence. Granted, it being right across from Taylor Square that has a lot more reports of paranormal activity, I wanted to come here at night to just look around and see what's going on. Minus the cars, it is kind of creepy. Maybe I just don't like this part of the city. I'm ready to go into downtown in the heart, going to Factor's Walk. Ooh, I thought that was a ghost dog. I'm here on Bay Street, one of the coolest places in Savannah, but now I'm approaching one of the most haunted places of Savannah. Factor's Walk. Here between River Street and Bay Street, Factor's Walk used to be the primary place of commerce for the cotton industry. Not only that, it was also home to the cotton exchange. Here is where the price of cotton was actually determined as well. These buildings used to be warehouses, connected on each side by little iron bridges. There have been many murders and accidental deaths here. A lot of the paranormal reports include dark shadows hovering around, going in and out of these buildings.
There's a bunch of different theories. The stone tape theory is not the only theory, and it is pseudoscience. It's not proven at all at this point. But I also think that humans, I don't know, we're not that smart yet. And we're gonna figure out this stuff as we go, and it will make more sense.
I think I was like 13. We were staying in a big house on one of the squares. I have no idea which one it was. And it was, the owners lived in like the unit next to us, and we were renting out the one beside of it. And it had been like one big house at one point, and they just put like a wall down it. And we're kids, so we were like scared to go upstairs because one of them were like, something like it's haunted up there. And so we all like were staying downstairs. I was just like, this is stupid, like it's not actually haunted. And I like, the last day we were there, I like went upstairs by myself, and before then none of us went upstairs alone. I was eating pizza from Mellow Mushroom, and I remember sitting there in the chair and I was like eating, and I felt blowing on the back of my neck, and I felt somehow my cousin had like snuck up on me and was gonna scare me. So I turned around like really fast and I went, ugh. And there was no one there, and I just heard like little footprints like running away from me, and I just remember being like frozen. I was like, called for my cousin, and he like came up there, and I was like, okay, there he is. Come to find out, my grandma was downstairs talking to the owner because we were checking out that day, and they were like, be real with us, is this place haunted? And she was like, we had it blessed. It's just a kid who likes to play pranks.
Some of you might be wondering, why run around, look for haunted locations? Well, one, it's fun. Two, it's mostly free. So why not? While you're here, alive, unlike a lot of this dark history that we've been talking about, you might as well try to build the dream life. That's why you should get my shirt.
Now, this is actually why Savannah is one of the most haunted cities in the world.
Why is that?
It's old. Had a lot of messed up stuff happen back in the day. Like people were being buried alive all the time. The first 80 years of Savannah, there was no hospital. There was no electricity. There was no nothing. People were being buried alive at a rate of about 2% at the end of the 1700s, archaeologists think.
Buried alive?
Pirates could legally kidnap people. And our pandemics of yellow fever were killing like 15% of the population. So you have an old town, like Savannah, or let's say Salem, Massachusetts. I used to live up there too. And you also have a well-preserved town.
Yeah.
You need that old material. You need the walls and the ceilings that saw the horrific stuff. And that's what creates these recordings. And a lot of people think that when these recordings are playing back, it's literally sort of electric in the air, and that's what's messing with the electronic equipment. And it's that final energy moment, you know, that captures that haunting. We don't get haunted from dead people, we get them from dying. And you can't explain it. It is pseudoscience. But you also can't deny that it happens all the time. Hearse Ghost Tours. We do ghost tours in Savannah. We got seats in the back of the hearse. Come check this out. I think it's cool because like a walking tour, like a bus could be like 30 people, but this can be like just 8.
This house here behind us is the Olde Harper Fowlkes house. This house was built in 1842. One family lived here for almost 100 years. The McAlpin Champion family, a very wealthy family with a plantation. This was their city house. They had another house just west of town at their plantation. They sold this building in 1939 to a woman named Olde Harper Fowlkes. She's a big deal in Savannah history because she was a real estate magnate and a single businesswoman. When she bought this house, they stamped the word woman on top of her deed because it was so unusual for a woman to be buying a property like this in her own name. The important thing from my point of view is that Olde Harper Fowlkes was my grandmother's best friend. For 50 years, my grandmother and Olde Harper Fowlkes were best friends because in the 1930s, Olde Harper Fowlkes opened a tea room in what is now the Pink House, one of Savannah's big haunted houses right over there. My grandmother worked there. They became friends. They were so close that my grandmother named her firstborn child after Olde Harper Fowlkes. So, 1985, Olde Harper Fowlkes dies and leaves this building to the Society of the Cincinnati. Now, I can hear you saying, what is the Society of the Cincinnati? It is a fraternal organization for officers and their descendants who were in the Continental Army with George Washington. The fact that Olde Harper Fowlkes left this building to the Society of the Cincinnati is one of the great betrayals of all time. As she was dying, Olde Harper Fowlkes was saying to people, who should I leave this house to? She had no descendants, she had no family. My grandmother was thinking, and her children were thinking, leave it to your best friend of 50 years who named her firstborn child after you. No, she gives it to the Society of the Cincinnati. So I found out much later from somebody who wants to remain nameless that Olde Harper Fowlkes had a reason. She considered that this house was haunted. very haunted with something that she considered dangerous. She didn't want anybody living here, but this house cannot be torn down. We're in a National Landmark Historic District, so it was either going to be somebody's house, a hotel of some sort, or this other possibility. Just before she died, some stranger said, leave it to the Society of the Cincinnati. They turned it into a museum, which means nobody will ever live here. So as far as I'm concerned, this house is filled with unanswered questions going back to the very beginning.
Not only this home, but so many mysteries surround Savannah, Georgia.
Check out my haunted folk pop music under the name Dusty Joy. Hit me up for live streams of Savannah under Dusty Joy Life.
Thank you so much, buddy. Truly a very eye-opening trip. However, in case you're interested on another one of the most haunted cities in America, see New Orleans here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a blessed day.